Hello everybody, good evening. So happy to see you here. Special welcome to Carole Cadwalladr. Is that correct?
Yes.
Good. And today's theme is freedom of the press. I'm very excited to have you here. My name is Agnete Haaland, and I'm going to give you some information about the festival before we start. As you know, Norwegian Pen celebrates 100 years this year. Well, I hope you know that, because the festival is going to last all the way till November 15th, and we have a great program, so please check it. It's on your seats. Bring the leaflet home and come back if you are interested. You're very welcome, and you're also welcome to become members if you work for freedom of expression, which is what Pen is doing. And the time limit of this conversation is an hour, and we're also going to make it possible to ask questions if you want to at the end of the conversation. All right? And if you want to become a member, you can check our website and see what it takes. And please join us and help us to fight for freedom of expression. And today Agnete G is sitting here. She's going to lead this interview. But first, we're going to do something that we are doing in all our arrangements. We have an empty chair. And an empty chair, that is, he's over here today, is a chair that should have been filled with someone who should have been here, but who can't be here because either he or she is in jail or he or she is in a situation where it's impossible to come here to sit and stay and use their voice. And Ingeborg from the Norwegian Pen's board is going to, Ingeborg Forland, is going to do today's empty chair. Please, the floor.
Thank you, Agnete. Well, as you know, Norwegian Pen marks 100 years of fighting for persecuted journalists and writers this year. And Julian Assange is a person in whose case we've been advocating for many years, stronger and stronger. The founder of WikiLeaks has been persecuted, particularly by the United States, since he was part of releasing the documents documenting war crimes in the Abu Ghraib prison, the Guantanamo Bay prison, and the diplomatic cables between the US and their stations back in 2010 and the years immediately after. He spent many years in a sort of asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, but since that opportunity was revoked, he has been held by British government for now 3.5 years, pending extradition to the United States, and for an editor and publisher to be persecuted and threatened with 175 years of prison is something that stands correctly, completely against the principles for which Norwegian Pen works. So the Assange case is central to us because free speech and the right to publish critical truths are at stake. And we thought that was particularly pertinent today, as we will be discussing the freedom of the press. So for Norwegian Pen, we stand by Julian Assange, and we wish he were here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingeborg. And now I'll give the floor to Agnete G, who was a member of the Norwegian Parliament for the Labour Party from 2013 to 2021. And right now she's entering the civilian life as a headhunter in Vicindi. And that's really good. We want politicians who actually know what reality is like as well. So that's good for you, and I think it's good for us as well. So please, you have the floor. And Carole, please come up and join on the stage. The floor is yours.
I feel like we're about to duet.
Is this okay now? Yeah, okay, good. Thank you, Agnete. Thank you, Norsk Pen. And thank you, Carole, for coming here. For those of you who don't know Carole's work, if you ask the question, who is standing up for free elections when money seems to be a stronger value than election laws, it's Carole. She's been doing that both professionally and personally for a number of years. And your work is brought to attention to Norwegian readers very much thanks to Hege Stein, who has been writing about both your work and juridical battle. And we owe you a big thank you. So thank you for being here.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you so much for having me and for supporting the freedom of the press and turning out on a night when you could be watching something on Netflix, as just discussed instead. So thank you, very much appreciate that. We'll try and keep it exciting for you to make it worthwhile.
It's funny you should mention Netflix, because if one should describe the sum of your work in the story that you have been telling and brought to the world, is that it's something about the person gallery and the network that you have been revealing that makes it sound like a conspi festival. So almost hard to believe. And we will get into all that. But first of all, do you mind telling us, how did you get into the link between tech and politics? Because I can imagine you didn't wake up one morning out of the blue thinking, I wonder if there's a link between the Leave campaign and the Trump campaign and Cambridge Analytica. Let me Google this. How did you get into the link between technology and politics?
Yeah, so it was very much so I have spent 16 years as a feature writer for The Observer, the Sunday version of The Guardian. And you know, I always just say I had you know, one of the best jobs in journalism, in my view, in that I did feature writing and I did interviews and I did reportage and I did op-eds, and it was sort of like a dream brief, really, in sort of like writing for these different bits of the paper. And I didn't deal with all of these, you know, the kind of evil people and the corruption and the investigative, like they were elsewhere. They, you know, somewhere else on the paper. And but I did start getting interested in technology. And actually what happened to me is my kind of light bulb moment was I actually got invited to a TED conference in 2005. And 2005, you know, it was kind of early days. They had Jimmy Wales, who had just set up his Wikipedia, you know, this online encyclopedia where we were like, how does it work? You know, anybody can write it. And they were sort of speaker after speaker who kind of stood up and said, yes, and what we're doing is we're trying to cure cancer by having everybody kind of come and, you know, contribute to the, you know, the commons. And it was that sort of great flowering moments of, you know, everything's free on the internet and there's this sort of, you know, bursting with possibilities of the connected web. And so I really boarded that train. I was a full-out tech utopian of like, it's amazing, we're going to cure cancer by coming together as a crowd. And so I just started sort of writing about it over the next decade, really. And at the time, the only people who were writing about technology in the newspaper were tech reporters who were very techie. And I was writing about it as a layperson who was just interested in the sort of effects on society and things. And then gradually what happened in the course of that 10 years, I was like, maybe there are some bad things about this too. You know, it was very gradually that I was like, oh, okay, so it's kind of useful when revolutionaries in the Arab Spring have access to this technology. But actually, what does it mean when Google's buying up all these robot companies? Is that, and what about Amazon? You know, Amazon's wiping out all of the high street shops. So I started doing more critical reporting on it. And in fact, one of the first big things is I went undercover in an Amazon factory, actually, for a week at Christmas time, which was kind of eye-opening. So I had started doing these things, but I was, and you know, so like I said, it was from that very much a layperson's kind of view of it. And I had just been to, it's a very long story. I'm sure you won't look, this is the long version of it. So I had, I think it was in 2015, I'd been on a trip to San Francisco and I'd gone to this conference called TechCrunch Disrupt. And it was like everybody at this conference was trying to disrupt something. And, you know, journalism is an industry which got disrupted. And what it meant was all the journalists lost their jobs. And the music industry got disrupted. And it meant musicians couldn't make money from music anymore. And so I'd sort of been thinking about this. And then what happened is it was like a week before the US election in 2016. And there was there were 3 stories which happened in the same week, which made me think there is something really odd happening on the internet. And this is not a usual election. And this is, you know, there's a sort of disturbance happening. And one of the stories was WikiLeaks, actually, dumping the emails, Hillary Clinton's emails a week before the election. One of the things was there was a country in Africa which got taken offline by a DDoS, by an attack. And there were people saying, oh, it looks like a trial run for a bigger country for maybe an election. This idea, if you took a country off the internet in a week, you know, on the day of an election, what would happen? And then the third story, which at the time hadn't got much attention, but then went on to, was these teenagers in Macedonia who were writing fake news stories for Facebook. And it was a sort of literally unbelievable story. Teenagers were making up stories about Hillary Clinton because they could make thousands and thousands of dollars by putting them out on Facebook and getting people to click on them. So there were these 3 stories, and I was just like, there is something, I was like, oh, okay, this is, politics is being disrupted. This is like, an election is being disrupted by technology. And I just Googled, and I thought somebody must have written about this, and I Googled it, and I was like, oh, nobody's written this, okay. So I wrote just an op-ed piece, a comment piece before the election, and I just remember my editor at the time kept on sending the article back to me, and he was like, what? They're making up fake news story. Anyway, so it was this thing. And then, but it still sounded unbelievable, and then the Trump election happened. And there was that moment of, you know, we were all kind of in shock. And then these very first stories, that story about the teenagers, suddenly people were like, what was going on the, like, there was suddenly this attention to this fake news online. And there was big denial. Mark Zuckerberg, you know, said it was ludicrous, the idea that had any impact. And my editor just said, write a bigger piece about it. And I wrote, it was like 2 weeks after that election, and I wrote this first story about fake news, and everything kind of spun out from there, actually. I just couldn't believe what I found, actually.
And you were very much so the right person at the right time, and this was it was like watching the world aspiring autocrats who until then had thought that Facebook and internet is their enemy until they found out, oh, this is a perfect tool for us, we can use it. And you enlightened us in a very inspiring way for many, to put it in many words, but there's one case that reached Norway and reached the world, really, and that is when you got Christopher to speak, and you mentioned him in his article as the gay Canadian vegan who somehow ended up creating Steve Bannon's psychological warfare mindfuck tool. That is an interesting story. How did you get in touch with Christopher?
Yeah, so this story, which became the Cambridge Analytica Facebook scandal, we did that story in the spring of 2018. But it really, I was on that story for a sort of year and a half before we published that. And it took me that long to publish it. And it was that first article I did in November 2016. This first article I did on fake news when I'd sort of discovered that these really dystopian things had happened, essentially, to the internet. And, you know, there's one story which I tell from that, which kind of, I tell it because it takes me to the next bit, and it's so disturbing, and we still don't really know what happened. But one of the things which first disturbed me was I started looking at Google search, and I started putting in search terms into Google because I was trying to figure out how Google search worked. And I put Jews into the search bar. And then Google likes you to ask a question. So I've said, are Jews? And Google gave me, you know, it gives you choices of what you're looking for. And it gave me the first choice was, are Jews evil? And, you know, so this was like 2 weeks after Trump got elected. And I was like, what's going on? And I'd clicked on that. And it gave me this every single result was websites I'd never heard of, tiny fake news websites, all of which said, yes, Jews are evil. And then the next suggestion was, did the Holocaust happen? And I was kind of like, what has happened? And it was really unclear. And it's still sort of unclear in that it's like this sort of very dark and dystopian stuff was being put out on the internet, was creating this network that was sort of suffocating mainstream news and mainstream source of information. And when I was like trying to figure out what was going on in here, I spoke to this sort of first academic I came across who was studying this like as a network. And he said to me, he sort of said, well, you know, and he sort of said, people think about this as like stories. It's not stories, it's a system. And you can see it's like a cancer, it's growing and it's suffocating the kind of mainstream sources of news. And he said, there are companies like Cambridge Analytica that can use this information, that if you go and visit one of these websites, can embed like a cookie on your computer. So it knows what you've been looking at. And then it can use that information to target you with political ads. And I'd never heard, I was like, who's Cambridge Analytica? And fateful words. And he said, oh, it's this company, you know, it's this political campaigning company. And it worked for Trump in America. And it worked on the Brexit campaign. And I was like, oh, who are they? They sound odd. And that was sort of it. You know, I then started looking into this company and I was like, it was bizarre, you know, because it sounded like it was like a really high-tech data company. And on the one hand, it was. But it was also a 30-year-old military defence contractor based in London who had worked for NATO and for the Department of Defence and now was doing elections and using... This was like military technology, you know, psychological warfare. It was now using in America and Britain. So that was the sort of, and I was like, well, who is this company? What are they? And I started writing about it. But I was like, I need more information. And so I tried to track down ex-employees. And that was how I found Christopher Wiley, who was this... I don't know if you remember anything about the story. It's maybe this guy with pink hair who became the whistleblower. And so I discovered Chris.
How did you discover him?
I started just going through LinkedIn. Okay. I mean, at the time, I was, you know, I wasn't an investigator, you know, I didn't consider myself an investigative journalist. I was just really good at stalking ex-boyfriends on the internet. I always say that because it's like, actually, we all have these skills. You know, it's like, I thought, investigative journalism, what do they do? Like, you know, and then I discovered, actually, it's like chatting to people. It turned out that I was like, I can do that. So, and yeah, looking up things on Facebook and looking up things on LinkedIn, I could do that. I just didn't realise that was what was sort of, you know, involved. And so I found one ex-employee who would talk, and he said, as soon as I started talking about Facebook, and he said, you need to talk to Christopher Wiley. And I was like, who's Christopher Wiley? And he said, he's the guy. He was like, he's the guy who got the Facebook. data.
And what Christopher tells you in this piece is, well, it's no wonder it's Halloween tonight, because it's very scary. And he says things like, we broke Facebook. How did they break Facebook?
I mean, yeah. I mean, look. And then it turns out that many other people have broken Facebook, including, the Russian state. But they, what Cambridge Analytica did was just very clever, which is they got everybody to do a quiz, a personality. You'll see them. If ever you see a quiz on Facebook or Instagram, they're like, what do you look like as a 16th century oil painting? Any of those ones. You are being data harvested. You are being data harvested. And those ones, they're after you for facial recognition. And they did the same sort of trick. They put out a personality quiz, and which was very seductive. It's like, everybody who did the personality quiz, and in fact, they paid people to take a sort of $1 a time to do the personality quiz. And then when they ticked a box, which gave Cambridge Analytica, well, the contractor who did it, permission to scoop up not just their Facebook data, but all of their friends' data as well. So this is how they got a couple of 100,000 people to take the personality quiz. And from that, just their friends' networks, they got 87 million people's data worldwide. And, that's not just people I think, that's everything you've ever done and interacted with on Facebook. It's also things like your private messages, and they really did have access to everything.
And if I got it right, they harvested this information and they used it to get to know people's fears and dreams and what could potentially polarize, and then they used that information to target fake news and political ads towards these Facebook profiles.
Yeah, I mean, there's always been a lot of debate about how well the technology worked, and I think that's kind of very fair. But what we know about that there was certain key things that they could look for. So, I had a psychologist get in touch with me, and I remember him telling me, he said that personality quiz that they've done. He said it's not the normal one, which is this sort of standardized psychological test. He said what they're looking for there is neuroticism. And that is, so they're looking for people who can be scared easily. You find that, and then targeted with scary things. We know that was one of the ways that they targeted people. And we know also from, actually, this was a Channel 4 news investigation, which was done just before the 2020 election. They had all of the data from the Trump campaign. And what they discovered was that they were targeting people not to change their votes in some places. They were targeting people to stop them voting. So voter suppression, which is that, so they were targeting, I think there were a lot of people they were targeting were Democrat-leaning black voters, and they were targeting them with ads saying Hillary Clinton, is no friend of the black community. And so they're trying to suppress the turnout as well. It's another way. So it's kind of like it's very, the thing which makes it really dark is that when you have a political ad, leaflet through the door, or you see a billboard, or you see a TV commercial, that you're seeing a political ad, it's been paid for by a political party. The way that this works is they were just sending news stories into your Facebook feed. You wouldn't know it was an ad. It just looks like a news article, but it's not.
And what kind of content would that did they use in the Brexit situation? What kind of content did they spread?
Well, so just to give you one example from America that they used, which is there was a story they did about how the Pope had endorsed Donald Trump as president. And millions and millions and millions of people saw that. and believed it because it looked like it looked like a real news article. And in Britain they did things like this was a different campaign, but it was using these Facebook dark ads. They had they did 1 billion ads on Facebook, which we know, and a vast majority of that was all about the threats from the Turkish immigrants who are going to flood Britain. They were going to flood Britain because Turkey was joining the European Union. I don't know if you knew that, but apparently in 2016 in Britain, that was a fact, that Turkey was joining the European Union and there was going to be a flood of brown infidels who were going to storm our shores. And, it's this fear-mongering. That's that works best, essentially. If you want to provoke a reaction from people, and one of the easiest reactions to provoke is sort of hate and fear, really.
Absolutely. And you said 1 billion ads. Is that the exact number? 1 billion?
It's complicated because there were 2 different Leave campaigns in Britain, both of whom got up to shady shit. Both broke the law, both got away with it. One of the campaigns, in which was led by Boris Johnson, and the campaign manager was the guy who went on to be his chief of staff, this man called Dominic Cummings. They're the ones. So they're the ones who told lies about Turkey, and these are the ones who told lies about everything. And were sort of overtly racist in public, and these ones were like covertly racist on Facebook. And the Dominic Cummings, that's the one who did the vote leave stuff. He says that they served over 1 billion ads, and the vast majority of that were in the last 3 days. And that was, we now, as a result of our work, we know that money they spent in the last 3 days was illegal. They deliberately subverted our election finance laws.
Yeah, they broke British law.
The law.
They broke the law.
They broke the law.
And the result is what we know. Not only the result of the Brexit vote, but the result is also a broken democratic climate. In what way?
Yeah.
But
they sort of to recap, Vote Leave broke the law. Leave EU, the other campaign, broke the law. Cambridge Analytica broke the law in Britain and in America. Facebook broke the law in Britain and America. And the consequences of all of this massive law breaking was nothing. They all got fined. They all got fined different amounts of money, and they all paid the fines, and they sort of broke democracy in the process. And everybody just carries on as normal. Except it's not normal now. Our politics is deeply bizarre and has been ever since.
But let's get a bit back to what laws they broke, because in the UK there's rules about how much money you can use in a campaign,
and you have the same here, right?
Yeah, and as I've read myself to it, is that there's not still now even possible to know how much money was spent, where the money came from, and who knew what was happening. Is that still the situation?
That is still situation, and I would hazard a guess that's also the same situation here, because the whole point about Facebook and the other social media platforms is that they are totally opaque. There's been a little bit of transparency which came in after the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Facebook introduced an ad archive, but it only works to a tiny degree. And essentially, if you are a bad person, say I am a bad person, and I decided that I wanted to try and tip the next Norwegian election, it would be so easy for me to do it. in that I can just set up an entity with a different name and I can flood your social media platforms with ads, and you would have no idea who was placing them or where that money was coming from. And that is still the case. So it is still the case that sort of social media platforms, you know, they call it sort of a threat surface. And the only difference now is that in 2016, we didn't know this was happening. It was only as afterwards, as, you know, journalism and academia and the FBI, that we now know this stuff. But almost nothing has been done to prevent it.
Absolutely, and it's funny you should mention Norwegian elections because we have had a debate here. So thank you for coming. You're right in time. So the situation is just, to put it in short, the ministry in charge of elections ordered a report on how can foreign actors interfere with Norwegian elections, because that is an interesting topic. The researchers were promised that this a report should be published on the department's pages on the internet, and they delivered the report, and it wasn't published. And the reason why it wasn't published, at first they were told it wasn't published due to lack of time. And after that, the minister himself commented, and he said that the reason why I'm not going to publish this is that if the researchers are so into the political question of whether or not Norway should have a trade, the same trade agreement with the EU that we have, they should join a political party. Some has said that he politicized the researchers' work. The case they drew up was that the people that are against this trade deal that Norway has, that is a place to go to try to polarize more, to try to create more polarized debate and put people up against each other in Norway. And that is, and it shows how a very legitimate political view can be used by external actors. What do you make of this situation? Could you help us?
Yeah, when I was told about that this morning, I sort of said, oh, that sounds very British. This kind of weaponization of essentially any subject which is polarizing in that way is such... It's so vulnerable to being kind of, like you say, politicized and weaponized, and then it becoming, you know, enemies can use it to sort of stoke and incite and inflame that debate. And, it's just depressing, I think, how often that happens. And it's, you know, that's a vulnerability, it seems, for Norway, is that is a debate which can and will be weaponized. And you need to have research and reports and investigations to try and protect you as a society. And to have that, a sort of government minister trying to cover it up and making those claims, it does seem, not very sensible.
But it has been several years since you started writing these articles. These articles are worldwide information and has been debated in Norway, in the US, in Britain, and still these things happen. Still elections are inflated. Still troll fabrics exist. What's that do with your motivation?
I think the thing about it is that I think the vast majority of people, this is a very alien. They don't know about this stuff, you know, and it sounds far-fetched, and it's really and a lot of it's invisible. So it's like it's really hard to understand this subject, and most people just, you know, then they're more interested in what's on the, you know, and it's complicated. It's really complicated and intentionally so. So I still feel we're really at the foothills of only just beginning to understand this subject. And the terribly depressing thing is that as we kind of like start to understand a bit of what's going on, the technology leaps ahead. So we're just like, this is 2016, I'm talking about what was happening then. Whereas we know it's only got more sophisticated since. And the way, you know, the sort of like what you can do with AI, the manipulation. I mean, in America, for example, ahead of the 2020 election, I know a lot of academics and NGOs who are in this sort of election protection space. And everybody was rehearsing for the deep fake video that was going to come out on the day before the election, which would have, you know, show Biden tearing up a Bible or something, you know. But and that is the scenario that we genuinely are expecting in an election, because the thing about sort of, especially video as a sort of fake source of news, it's impact. You know, we see how things go viral, and if you've got in that 24-hour period of an election, it's really the last thing that people see which can, you know, swing a vote. And if the last thing you've seen is a very plausible viral video that sort of, you know, gets you emotionally, you can see the sort of danger, you know, there. And that didn't happen in the US election, but it feels like it's only a matter of time before that does happen in a major election.
Absolutely. Fear is a very strong weapon that is used by, has been used as you have revealed. And one of the easiest ways to understand what is happening is to try to explain what it's not. And you have said very clearly that this is not about left or right. This is not about leave or remain. It's about being able to have free and fair elections. And doing that like cleaning job mentally is very important, because hate and fear and these strategies, they don't come with an ideology, right?
And you can especially see that in the way that like Russia has interfered in democracies. You know, in that we, you know, the sort of reporting of it got into this, like, they're, you know, the Russians are supporting Trump. But, you know, you could see actually, like, one of the amazing things which came out of the FBI's investigation was that you could see that the Russian state was supporting both Black Lives Matter, you know, and Blue Lives Matter. It's like both. You don't need to do either or. It's just what causes the most disruption, what decreases trust in the system, what, you know, polarizes a sort of society most. And so any of these like hot trigger topics are the ones, you don't have to make stuff up. You just exploit the weaknesses that we already have in society,
if you are in this business of tampering with other countries' elections, it's very important to make sure that people like you shut the fuck up. And there have been people who have tried very hard at doing that. And the quote that I gave just earlier from you was from a TED talk you had about your work and about the connection, about Facebook and about Facebook's role in breakfast. And could you just tell us what happened after you had that TED talk?
So it was totally... I gave this talk at TED in 2019, which was, at the time, the most terrifying thing. It's no longer the most terrifying thing I've done. Come to that. But at the time, it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever done, which was talking on this stage, no notes. You know it's going to be filmed. It's going to be online forever. And they had it was like a cathedral of tech bros, including like the main tech bros in chief. There was like Jack Dorsey was there, the Facebook executives there, Sergey Brin from Google was there. So what it was, and like I was like going into their cathedral and sort of, you know, how do I say that without defecating on their shiny technology, and it had, you know, it was before bashing tech got fashionable, and it felt like it did have an impact, and but the biggest impact it had was it turned out on me. It's like that fire, you know, when you sort of they send out the bomb and then it rebounds and blows up in your face. I had one of those experiences because the main funder of the Brexit-campaign, who's a guy called Arron Banks, then went and sued me for defamation for 23 words that were in this talk. And that has consumed my life from that 2019 till now, essentially. And yes, the whole point of that was to shut me up, shut news organisations up from... There'd been a lot of journalism, a lot of investigation into him, a lot about where the source of his money came from, a lot about... his relationship with the Russian government. There was a whole wealth of journalism out there, but it all got shut down because... The 23 words, which are now lawful, because I have won my case, although he's trying to appeal it. The 23 words were, I pointed to a photograph of Arron Banks and Nigel Farage, who's his close associate, with Donald Trump. They were the first visitors into the Trump Tower after the US election. And I said, and I'm not even going to go into the lies that Arron Banks has told about his relationship with the Russian government. And I didn't go into the lies. But we had published that previously in the Observer. And what had happened is I had... with a fellow journalist called Peter Jukes, we had received this stash of emails which Arron Banks was in communication with the Russian embassy, the Russian ambassador, from the week that he launched the Leave campaign to after the... on the day before, just the timing's very good, on the day before he launched the campaign to take Britain out of the European Union, he was invited into the Russian embassy by the Russian ambassador, who introduced him to a Russian oligarch who offered him a diamond deal and a gold deal. And from the emails, we could see that they continued to negotiate those deals in the months running up to Brexit. And they continued meeting afterwards. What there was no evidence of was that he individually had taken either of those deals, although one of his associates did. And that's what we found out. And that was what he, publishing that in the Observer over a series of weeks. Another newspaper published it as well, the Sunday Times. That was what... you know, he took great exception to. But he didn't sue the Guardian Observer. He sued me for those words in the TED Talk when I was talking about the journalism. And that was deliberately to get me as an individual. He didn't go after TED either. They're an American organisation. So it was very specifically about targeting me and you know, it's incredibly expensive to defend yourself from defamation. It costs £1 million, essentially, to... and I had to, you know, I crowdfund it. It was amazing. I had 30,000 people contribute to a crowdfunder and raised almost £1 million. So it was, people, the general public could see what was happening. And that was the thing which sort of sustained me, was I had this public support. But it was, I still went into the trial. I went on trial in January, and when I went into the trial, I knew that if I lost, I was £500,000 short, and I would kind of have to go bankrupt, and all the rest of it. So it was very high levels of terror and jeopardy.
Not only kind of get bankrupt, but you also you didn't only go to court, you didn't only raise this money, but you also won.
I won, I know. But I had 6 months of absolutely pure hell. So I stood trial in January, and it was, I still haven't, I haven't really spoken about it very much, because it was just so, I was in the dock for 3 days being cross-examined about my journalism, and and then Russia invaded like the next month. And still there was nothing in the press about any of this stuff. And then I had to wait 6 months for the verdict. So it was a very difficult time, yeah.
It's impossible to imagine how difficult it could be. And it's so impressive what you have done, not just then, but also later. But what I thought was interesting, you said that there had been lots of journalism about this guy before you got sued, not only from you, but from different other journalists. And the problem with strategically lawsuits towards journalists is that it works sometimes. Because what happened with all the other critical journalism about this guy when this happened?
Well, I had a very good lawyer, barrister, who defended me. It was the first time a journalist had gone to trial on a public interest defence. So us saying this work was in the public interest, and that's why, such a high bar. It's about a politician. It's about the funding of elections. It was, this was the arguments which were made. And sorry, well, I've just forgot the question then. No
problem. The answer is probably more interesting than the question. But I asked what happened with all the other critical journalists about this guy.
The point I was going to get to is that, so Gavin, who is the barrister, he said, one of the last times I saw him, he was writing something about these lawsuits, and he'd gone back very carefully and looked at the kind of what had happened around the journalism. And he said it was so striking, because he said there is a whole sheaf of articles and investigations which had been done into him and the Leave campaign right up to the moment that he issued the lawsuit against me, and then it stopped dead. And it's stopped dead ever since. And so in that way, although, yes, I did, spend 3 years defending myself, and did manage to defend myself, I didn't manage to defend the journalism in a way. I mean, I defended that story, but in terms of the public interest of knowing actually what happened in Britain in 2016 in this once-in-a-lifetime referendum that has changed the course of our country's history forever, and there's so much we don't know. It was really effective, and it shut it down.
And just to illustrate how little people know, and how big responsibility you have taken, combined with how little responsibility other people has been taking, is that the British Parliament personally has asked Mark Zuckerberg to come and show them and tell them how much money has been spent, what ads were shown to people, because that's not possible to track afterwards, right? But he has refused.
Well, it's just that, I mean, I think that's probably true. I mean, it seems to be true everywhere, which is that the old mechanisms of accountability no longer work. It's not enough now to have a scandal in a newspaper and expect a government minister to resign. It doesn't work like that anymore. And even in this, the case of so in this, on the one hand, you can argue that the journalism really worked. We exposed the wrongdoing and investigations happened and they even were fined. You know, Facebook, as a result of this, got fined $5 billion. It's a record fine in the US. And on the day that that fine was announced, Facebook's share price went up because it's like 5 billion on Facebook's, you know, balance sheet. It was nothing. And actually they escaped, you know, the executives being being penalised. So it's that you know that those fines it's just a cost of doing business. And you know, and the thing, the kind of like the sort of joke that I make is that, except it's not a joke, is that, you know, in all of this investigation, where we're sort of saying we see law breaking here and law breaking there, the only person who's gone on trial is me.
Why aren't you clapping?
Oh no, I didn't mean it. No, no.
But what does that say about election law as a valuta for democracy? I mean,
I kind of like, it's really difficult for me to say this. Election law is, what's my polite way, is screwed. I mean, election laws don't work anymore. They don't work in Britain. They don't work in America. I'm pretty sure they don't work here because they're incompatible with the digital age. You know, election laws sort of grew up over 100 or so years, you know, to do with paper ballots and, you know, corrupting individual voters. Now you can corrupt thousands of voters for pennies, essentially, using the kind of poison wells of the internet. So that none of those, and governments, you know, there's a little bit of recognition of that from some governments, but nobody really knows what to do about it. So it's a kind of, and also politicians need social media. They need the internet to run their own campaigns. So that's one of the other problems about it. So I mean, I think we're in a very dark place still.
Absolutely. And in your TED Talk, you say that you don't really think that we are able to have a free and fair election anymore. Do you still believe that?
Yeah. I mean, you can in some countries where the sort of, you know, maybe people are more honest, there's less kind of desire from foreign states to interfere. In some countries like the US, they don't control the money. So it's all, you know, their democratic system is already massively distorted. But particularly in countries where the electoral laws are based on tight control of how much each side can spend, and this old-fashioned idea of a level, which we have in Britain, theoretically, a level playing field, that doesn't work anymore.
And you have been doing all this work. You have been gone through this personal hell, as you describe it, and that I'm sure it was, and you have paid such a big price for that as many people as possible is been giving this information in the belief that, well, if I just tell this well enough to many enough people, then they will understand, then there will be a change. And then it just keeps happening all over again. So if truth is not something that is creating change, what do you think it takes to make it better?
I mean, I think that I sort of still fundamentally believe in the power of a good story. And I think that we're only, you know, this is all so recent. Like I say, in 2016, we just didn't know about any of this. And the technologies, you know, and elections have only been online for, you know, less than a decade, really. So this has all moved so fast, and it's not surprising that there's only a few people who know about it and care about it. But I think that it's not just politics in the future. This is going to affect lots of different parts of our lives. And, you know, there's Christopher Wiley these days. He works for H&M, you know, the clothing retailer. I was, you know, I was like, well, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe he can only do psychological warfare with clothes now. It's like, this is a good thing. But, you know, I remember him telling me that actually all the brands are facing this. You know, that there's all that, you know, even, you know, Nike gets you know, kind of targeted with distorted information that you know, even that can be used to sort of like poison the sort of infosphere that we're in, or you know, the vaccines, you know, that was the next one. I mean, that was the one, wasn't it? That it was sort of like, this isn't just politics, actually, it's our health. It's any of these subjects can be weaponized and become a sort of site of really, you know, harmful disinformation.
And even though it could be any subject that people disagree on, really. And you have described elections, tech, and you haven't taken any political sides, but what have you experienced about the story about you? Because not only did you go through the trial, but also like a very and we were witnessing it here, a very hateful campaign against you on social media. What was the story? Did you, were you put into one political side, and what was the story told about you?
Well, I'm a crazy cat lady conspiracy theorist whose lies have been, you know, spread across the internet, and who lost her case against Arron Banks, and whose journalism has been completely debunked. I mean, that's the story that the right tells about me, and it's, you know, because they couldn't actually attack my journalism, because it's evidence-based, it's checked by editors, it's legal before, you know, it's like, it's published very carefully. They haven't been able to, and it's been, you know, it became the official investigator. They've never been able to attack that. So it is this old-fashioned ways of attacking me for, you know, I sort of say reporting while female. So, you know, there's like many crimes which can be forgiven, but not for being, you know, a woman trying to do journalism. That's not very forgivable. So it's been and, you know, essentially for me is that because I was reporting on this subject, which was very political, very polarised. Brexit is the most polarising subject still in Britain. So even though I was just trying to find out what had gone on, that made me a political target. And that made me, you know, I sort of say that I became a sort of culture war hate figure. And, you know, so it was very intense, the amount of sort of online harassment and negative stories. And, you know, and I think that's what helped give the permission to this guy to take this lawsuit against me, is that I was, you know, I was a sort of, you know, just a punch bag, really. So, yeah, it's been, I mean, I have found that at different times, you know, there was times when I was like, well, I must be doing something right if they're coming after me. To finding it just really depressing. I found it really depressing. The thing I found most depressing, I think, was that I really feel that, like, in Britain, you know, like, if you're racist online, you'll get called out for it. And if you're, you know, like, thank goodness. But it was sort of being misogynistic online. It just happens. It's just everywhere. And it's not even seen as, you know, I had a BBC presenter who came after me, you know, called me Mad Catwoman on Twitter. And he was a senior BBC politics presenter, and there was no, you know, there was no penalty for that.
No reaction at all?
No reaction, no.
No
price to pay. That's perfectly acceptable.
No consequences, no nothing.
Yeah.
That is absolutely devastating to hear. Have you... do you regret anything?
I mean, it's kind of like I was at this event on Friday, and I was talking to this lawyer, and I said, I said, if I can just take myself out of it, so if I just take myself out of that lawsuit and think about what it actually did, and what it actually did was that a judge went through all of the evidence and wrote this very clear, precise legal judgment about exactly what Arron Banks' relationship with the Russian ambassador was in the months up to the Brexit campaign. That is now part of the historic record. And given that the British government won't investigate any of these things, I sort of feel that, you know, like if you want to hold on to kind of like facts and evidence, we now have that in this. So that's, you know, I feel proud of that. But it's at a personal level, I haven't really, I'm still processing it. I'm finding it really, you know, it's had a kind of quite overwhelming effect upon me and my life and my health and, you know, all sorts of different things. So I'm still sort of, still dealing with that. Even though I won, people say to me, but you won. And I'm like, yeah, that's true, thank God.
Yet I hate to interrupt in a very interesting conversation, but I mean, as a freedom of expression organization, we have to allow the people here to ask you questions. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, so will you please also take some questions from the floor or from the audience?
Absolutely, yeah. Herr Hjulstein?
My name is Agnete G.
Yes.
Because this is being streamed, please use that microphone over there when you ask questions. Thank you.
I've only been working in broadcasting for almost 40 years, so I should know. I mean, my name is Agnete G. I'm a journalist as well. And I just wondered, Arron Banks is a guy with loads of money. He funded Nigel Farage's No to EU campaign. You won the lawsuit that he made against you. But do you think he'll leave you alone now?
Agnete, there's a question.
You did get a letter from him 2 days ago, didn't you?
Yeah. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about that, actually. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a really good question. And yes, I don't know. And actually, I'm kind of, I'd forgotten this was being streamed. I mean, he spent £2 million to try and destroy me. That's a lot of money it's a lot of money. And so, yes, that's a question that I've asked is like, it was, I'd thought about, well, if I lose, it's terrible and I'm destroyed. But I also thought, well, if I win, like, what next? That was a question that I asked, yeah.
Hey.
Yes, Hege Ulstein, I'm a political commentator in Dagsavisen, and really on that note, because I was thinking while you were having your talk with Jette Christensen, that although you are a very clear speaker, and there is no doubt what you mean and what you are talking about, I also sense that sometimes you hold back when you talk about Mr. Banks, that you say that guy or that man instead of saying his name. And now to the answer to Agnete G, you said, oh my God, this is being streamed. So I really have two questions for you, and I will just say them both, and you can decide how you want to answer them, of course. But the one thing is, are you, after this legal process, are you more constrained in the way that you talk about his case and this issue? Because I guess that when you held the TED speech, which is these 23 words, I'm not even going to get into the lies, it's a very harmless sentence and probably well thought, and still it had all these consequences. So what has that done to you? That's the one thing. And the other thing is a completely different issue, but what's your take on Elon Musk's buying Twitter?
So, yeah, I mean, on the first one, it's that what I would say is that as a journalist in Britain, I know far more than I can publish. And in Britain, we operate in a hostile environment for the press. You know, our defamation laws are there to serve the rich only. And it is, even if there is a case which somebody has no chance of winning, no prospect of success, that you cannot, the only reason I could defend myself was because of this extraordinary generosity of ordinary people who contributed to my crowdfunders. And so the threat of the legal threat, and again, I'm here, sitting here, I'm exposed, I'm a freelancer, I'm speaking outside any news organisation. If somebody wants to sue me for words that I've said in a talk, I am totally vulnerable, and I know that I'm not going to have the support of my news organisation in, defending myself against that. So it is, we are all, I think all journalists operating in the sort of British sphere need to be really conscious about that. And, I speak quickly and, and fluently in a way, sometimes, not all the time. And you do, you worry actually for what you've said and how you phrase things. So that is a real fear. And secondly, I would say that the experience of being targeted by the right-wing press, the British right-wing press, the Russian state media and the US right-wing press is predatory. I found that thing of like, it is like being hunted. And so that does make you, do not great things for your psychology, I think. And then that was the second part of the question.
What's your take on Elon?
Oh, Elon Musk. I interviewed this guy yesterday, a really fascinating Ukrainian who's working for the Ukraine's IT army. He's basically an information warrior, and he's trying to put facts in front of a Russian audience. And he's a tech bro. And I said to him, I sort of said, Elon Musk, he's like the tech bro's tech bro. He's like tech bro in chief. And they all worshipped him. And I said, he's not just bought Twitter, but he's also been making he's got a hotline to Putin. And this poor guy, this Ukrainian, he was like, oh, I know, it's like, he was, he said, I worshipped Elon Musk, he's our god. And now he's in control of the most influential platform on the planet, and he has a hotline to Putin. I mean, it's like when we sort of say you can't make these things up, is that, we are all of us living in a sort of present that feels like a sort of confected, dramatic, what do you call it? A sort of literary device. Okay, this guy's going to take over this biggest social media planet. And then, it's just that we live in such crazy times. It's so hard to keep up, I think, isn't it?
Absolutt. Det flere spørsmål. Jeg har sett Gro Mette Moen, Sissel Wold. Var det flere? Ja. Gro Mette.
Okay. Hi, I'm Gro Mette Moen. I work at the Norwegian Consumer Council. And thank you so much for speaking up and for continuing in spite of everything. So in your TED Talk, you speak of threats from Facebook on suing the newspaper, I think. And I want to ask some questions about the technology giants and their role in all this. And could you elaborate a bit on your experience with the technology giants and their attempts to silence critique and to influence the public? And also, can you say something about how, do you have any ideas on how Facebook and Google and other companies that have a business model that feeds on our hate, how they can be held responsible to a greater degree than they are today? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah, so, it was really shocking. So when I started publishing the Cambridge Analytica stories in 2017, we had a big legal letter, pre-action letter from Cambridge Analytica. They were the first people who came after us. And, the company was owned by a billionaire Trump supporter. And so a legal letter from them was, very threatening to the news organisation. And they sent 3 letters through 2017. And the last one was something like 60 pages long. And it is real testament to The Guardian and that we joined forces with the New York Times and with Channel 4 News, and we published, in the face of those threats. So, which was, very courageous and impressive. And what was unbelievable to us was the day before we were due to publish, having kind of like jumped through all of these hoops, we had another legal letter from Facebook. So even though they'd known about this, I'd been publishing all these stories for the last year, other journalists, this thing about this Facebook hack, they denied and denied and denied. And then we're on the point of publishing this big expose with a whistleblower, and Facebook came off, threatened to sue us if we published that. And we were I was so kind of terrified initially, because it's like, oh my God, what do we, And then I went into the office and the lawyers had started looking at it, and they were just sort of like, actually, what are they? This is ridiculous. This is really, really ridiculous. And then I just remember I just got really angry, because I just seemed so outrageous that a sort of, Silicon Valley social media company should come after a British newspaper for, and it was, they really, they mishandled, we always knew that story was going to be devastating for Cambridge Analytica. What we didn't realise until we published it was how sort of Facebook would sort of self-explode, really, because they handled it so badly. They just tried to suppress the story. They tried to go after the journalist. They went after the whistleblower. And that's we see these big tech companies operating like that all the time now. They're not the sort of, nice guys in hoodies. They are these massive multinationals with billions of dollars at stake, and essentially, without any checks or balances on their power. So I think it's really terrifying, and that goes back to the Elon Musk situation, which is a billionaire owning a hugely influential platform and can do anything with it. I mean, this is fundamentally antithetical to liberal democracy. That is, and to just to us as people, because we, our brains have evolved, not to kind of understand this sort of information space in that way. Long answer, sorry.
No, don't say sorry. But next, maybe we should do we have time for a few more questions, Agnete? Thank you. So, Sissel Wold.
Yeah, my name is Sissel Wold, and I'm a journalist too at Norwegian Broadcasting, working with the Middle East mainly, where the elections are not so fair. Thanks a lot for coming here and sharing your experiences, and it's very frightening and scary, and it's Halloween night and everything. But even if we know about these things, it's shocking. So I have very many questions, but I will ask just two of them, because I'm wondering how these groups are targeted in front of Brexit, for example. If there are ads or fake news telling people in Britain that Turkey will become a member of EU. I mean, Turkey will never be in the EU, never. And how do people believe this? Do they never double-check their stories? Or are these people targeted as maybe, more scared than fact-finding people? That's one question. The other one is, we are looking at the midterm elections in the States now, and Donald Trump is moving again, and it's very scary to think about that. But what are your thoughts on the upcoming elections in the US? Do you think that there will be the same mechanisms like we saw the last times?
Thank you for the question. And I think so with the why do people fall for fake news is because it looks trustworthy. These things, maybe we've become more skeptical, but I think that you're in a low, skepticism environment, which is you're just looking at family photos and pictures and updates from your friends, and there's an interesting news article. So I think you're not primed to sort of realise that these are politicians trying to dupe you, A. B, we know that they targeted low education voters. That was, you can do that. That technology's out there. We know that, I think Dominic Cummings acknowledged that was one of their strategies. Cambridge Analytica, we know actually were targeting low cognition voters. There was evidence about that as well. So yeah, I don't think that's accidental. And then the midterms is, I'm not sure of the specifics, but we know that whenever there's sort of it's particularly those tightly fought races that are the most targeted, and we know so little about who's being targeted and how, because there's no transparency of that information. The tech platforms don't have to reveal that, so it's still almost complete darkness that these kind of elections are being held in.
And when you have the Parliament of Great Britain begging their niece, Mark Zuckerberg, to come and give that information, and he has the power to say no to the British Parliament. Next question.
Hi, my name is Jon Kverne. I'm dealing mostly with the Balkans. So, of course, there we're very used to see Russian influence in various organized and targeted forms. And we know that this was a part of Brexit and Trump's campaign, or at least there are very good reasons to believe so. And so I'm just going to grind an axe, even if I'm a member of Pen and everything. But I mean, it seems that WikiLeaks had a role both in the States and in Brexit. I mean, he seems to have met Farage, for instance, who has then recently been running around in Belgrade. Isn't that sort of an indication that also sort of not sort of low cognition individuals, but also sort of liberal, democratically minded audiences are being targeted, for instance, by playing to residual anti-Americanisms and stuff like that? Yeah,
that's so true. And actually, one of the other ways that, so as well as the kind of like the Turks are going to be flooding our shores, they also, what we do know, and we only know this because actually Parliament did force Facebook to hand over some of the ads which were shown. The other kind of ways that they were targeting people was that if we leave the EU, we'll save the polar bears, and that. So it's just whatever works. You can. That's the whole point. Is you can, there was no accountability. All of these things were seen, they were coming up in people's feeds and then disappearing. So there was never going to be, that idea of that really old-fashioned idea that political parties put out manifestos, and they make certain promises and they're elected on them and then they're held to account. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. You can just say anything you like, more or less. You put it out on some platform where it immediately disappears and, que sera. So, yeah, so Brexit luckily has saved all the polar bears. and it's been amazing. They said we'd get 350 million extra for the NHS every week. Obviously, that's happened too. And yes, that's all been fulfilled as promised.
And when we're winding up, so the whole point of a slap suit is to make sure that a public voice is made quiet. But your case wasn't called a slap suit, like formally. Is that because you didn't keep quiet?
I don't know. I mean, lots of 20 freedom of press organisations, including Pen, thank you very much, Pen, said that they believed that my suit was a slap suit and it had all of the hallmarks of the fact that I was being targeted as an individual and not the news organisations. So, I think that's, I still think we have no definition of what a slap suit is under British law, so it doesn't really matter if that's sorry, it's a kind of complicated point. There was no the whole thing is that if you're sued for defamation, all you can do is defend yourself from that charge. So which was the thing which upset me. One of the things which upset me at the time was all of the ways that I had also been targeted. That what didn't form any part of my evidence in the case. And so for the judge to say she didn't, he was free to bring the case. Well, he was. That's as the law stands. Any millionaire can take any case they want. If you haven't got £1 million, then you can't. That's the way the law works in Britain. It's free for all as long as you're a millionaire.
Well, that's a scary way to end this debate, but I think we have to end it now. And on behalf of Pen Norway, I'm going to give you a book, Carole, from it's a poetry collection by Ilham Shumak. He's an honorary member of Pen Norway. He's been in jail in Turkey for the last 29 years, and the last 7 in solitary confinement. And what has he done? He has been writing poetry. So this is his 9th collection, despite the fact that he's living in jail. So there is hope. And my hope tonight is that you won. I mean, that's something we should really give a hand. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you. And to Jette, thank you so much for chairing this conversation, and to Ingeborg for doing the empty chair. I'm going to give you Rabalder from Pen Norway. That's the story of the last 100 years of freedom of expression in Norway.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.